The real inside story on what actually happened in the 2022 elections and what it means for the future. This is Beyond Politics. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, former U.S. Congressman Paul Hodes. Well, the 2022 election was a bit like the movie The Hangover. We all woke up the next day, found out we had a tooth missing. There was a tiger in the bathroom. The Democrats had a darn good night. Then we were left trying to piece together what the hell just happened. So for giant nerds like me and Paul, it was amazing to find out that one of the world's greatest polling experts had put together a whole webinar explaining exactly what had happened. The problem was it was mostly just available to insiders. And we wanted all of our viewers and listeners to get the exact same insights that the insiders got. So we knew we finally, after about 2 years of doing this show, had to drag our old friend Jef Pollock onto the Beyond Politics show. If there were a Mount Rushmore of pollsters, Jef would be on it. He's the founding partner and president of Global Strategy Group. If you threw a paper airplane into a meeting of elected Democrats, which is recreationally fun, by the way, you'd be virtually certain to have it hit one of his clients. I could belabor how many there are, but just trust me, it's basically everyone. Jef, welcome to Beyond Politics.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Congressman. Good to be here. Nice to be able to share this. I don't know that I've ever heard Mount Rushmore. If it were, Matt, I think it'd probably be more like Mount Goldberg or something like that. It would be much smaller Jewish Mount.
Mount Goldberg, the Jewish version of Mount Rushmore. That's something that's deserving of exploration at some point. All right. So you did this major scan of the electorate, what happened in 2022. Why did Democrats perform so much better than we all expected?
My firm put together this post-election analysis, as we always have, and my chosen title for the presentation was "What the fuck just happened?" My staff rejected that. They say that I want to do that every 2 years anyway, so they said maybe we should do something a little different, and in fact talk about the election as what it was, which was a choice election. And I'll explain what that means in terms of choice, the play on the word choice in multiple ways. But let's sort of first set up the context, Matt, of where you started, which is that we walked into Election Day thinking that we were screwed. And we thought that for very, very good reasons. Number one, Joe Biden's job approval rating was in the low 40s. Sentiments in terms of the country were very low. And in general, when we have these midterm elections, the party in power tends to lose. That's exacerbated by a low presidential job approval rating, suggesting that the Democrats could lose, from a numerical perspective, could lose upwards of 45 seats in the House. Now, we actually all knew we couldn't lose 45 seats. Part of that is because, frankly, we had done worse 2 years before. So there weren't 45 seats to lose, but we still assumed that we were going to do very poorly based on all historical norms. In addition, you have two other things: split ticket voting shrinking, which it has continued to do, and radical partisan polarization, meaning the Republicans hate the Democrats hate the Republicans. It's called partisan antipathy. And so if you've got this kind of lack of split ticket voting and people, each party hating the other, you would assume that things are not going to go well because the Democrats kind of need that split ticketing to happen given the president's job approval rating. But there were some indicators going into it. None of us believed it, but there were some indicators. And the biggest indicator was the generic congressional ballot. The generic congressional, as Congressman Hodes knows very well, as all of us who follow politics, when we're going into the election, we ask questions as pollsters: who would you vote for if the election were held today? A Democrat or a Republican? So we don't give names. That's called the generic congressional ballot. And going into Election Day, the Republicans had about a percentage lead on that. That's pretty small relative to the fact that Joe Biden's job approval was about minus 12 or 13. And so what was going on with that gap? And so we looked at it in our data. And what we saw is you had a whole bunch of Democrats, 20% or so of Democrats, who said that they disapproved of Joe Biden, but yet none of them were voting for Republicans in that generic congressional. You had 70+% of independents saying they disapproved of Joe Biden, yet only about a third were voting for Republicans in the congressional ballot. And so that data should have said to us, maybe we are poised for something a little bit better. But again, none of us believed it, not because we didn't believe the data, but because historic data says that midterm elections are going to go against the party of the president. And that's not what happened. And it's historic in so many ways. The fact is that 70% of the toss-up races, according to the Cook Political Report, which is one of the neutral arbiters of sort of which races are up for grabs, The Democrats won 70% of those toss-ups. That's just remarkable. Take 2018, for example, where the Republicans won a third of the toss-up seats, or 2014, where the Democrats only won 30%. So that's the kind of thing we were looking for, and it's not what happened, in part because of that split with the generic. But there's a little bit more. Democrats did incredibly well in governor's races. We won the Massachusetts, Maryland, and Arizona governor's races, taking them from Republicans. In fact, the only seat that we lost in the gubernatorial was Nevada. The Democrats held on to incredibly important states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, New York, Kansas, Oregon. The Democrats flipped state legislatures in Michigan, the House, the Senate, the Minnesota Senate, the Pennsylvania House, which hadn't even been on the board. None of us even thought it was possible. Part of it is also that it wasn't necessarily a national election. It was a collection of local stories. Some of the states moved sharply left, like Pennsylvania and Arizona. Others moved sharply right, like Florida and New York. And there are, again, different individual reasons for that. But why did the Democrats do so well in the context of this? You would think that maybe it's because more Democrats turned out. That's not what happened. In fact, when we look at partisanship, the Republicans probably had about a 3% party ID advantage nationally, meaning if you asked every voter nationally, are you more like a Democrat or a Republican? The Republicans had a 3-point advantage on that. And in Arizona, the Republicans had a 6-point advantage. Georgia, a 6-point. Nevada, a 2-point advantage. Pennsylvania, Republicans had a 3-point advantage. And New Hampshire, the partisanship was actually dead even. All of those things would have suggested that the Republicans should have killed. So how on earth did we win? The reason is independent voters. The party in power in midterm elections tends to lose independent voters and tends to lose them by double digits. Go back to 2010, the Democrats lost independents by 18 points.
Tell me about it.
Indeed, Congressman Hodes knows well, right? And New Hampshire, it was the same, which I'll get to. In 2018, the Republicans lost independent voters by 13 points. So in 2022, the Democrats should have lost independents by double digits by way of Joe Biden being the president. And yet we ended up winning independents nationally by about 2 points. In Arizona, we won independents by 16. In Georgia by 11. In Nevada by 3. Pennsylvania by 20. New Hampshire by 11. How did this happen?
Yes, it's a great answer for what happened, but it sort of begs the why. So why did it happen?
Well, that's such a good question, Matt, and it allowed me to drink something in the middle of my filibuster, so I appreciate it.
No, that's perfect. I needed to give you a Rubio moment.
It's not a teeny bottle though. So one of the reasons is, in fact, we overthought or underthought presidential job approval. Here's what I mean by that. In 2018, Donald Trump's job approval on election day was 45 to 54. In 2022, according to the exit polls, Joe Biden's job approval rating was 44 to 45. Identical numbers. Both were in difficult shape. But among those people who approved of Donald Trump in 2018, the Republicans won 77% of those voters. That's logical. But in 2022, if you approved of Joe Biden, the Democrats won 89%. So greater consolidation on the approval. On the disapproval, if you strongly disapproved of either Biden or Trump, 91% voted for the other party. In both cases, strongly disapproved. But among those who somewhat disapproved of Donald Trump in 2018, the Democrats lost those voters by 29 points. In 2022, among those who somewhat disapproved of Joe Biden, the Democrats actually won them by 4 points. So this independent thing and the somewhat disapproved are kind of in tandem with each other, which is that, and goes back to that original set of data I was talking about these voters who, yeah, they said they disapproved of Biden, but they weren't voting for the Republicans. You had extreme Republicans on two pieces. One, Dobbs and abortion, big picture. So an extremism that the country didn't agree with. And you have the MAGA movement. And MAGA Republicans is something that I have actually worked on from a brand perspective. My firm, along with the Center for American Progress and a couple of other firms, did a 2-year project where we wanted to brand Republicans as more than just Trump. We wanted it to be MAGA. We wanted to bring in the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts into their problem in terms of a brand. And then, of course, the secondary piece was choice, where we had an advantage on the issue of choice. So the Republicans were all excited because we're going to talk about inflation, we're going to talk about taxes, we're going to talk about crime. So they spent millions and millions of dollars talking about many of those things. Jobs and inflation, about 48% of all voters nationwide said jobs and inflation was the issue, not abortion. Among that 48%, Republicans won them by 45 points. But among people who said abortion was the most important thing, not the economy, that was 18% of the voters. We won them by 64. Among people who said abortion and the economy were important, we won them by 27. And among people who said neither abortion or the economy were most important, we won them by 20. So yes, they won the jobs and inflation voters, but not by the margin that they needed to. And we won the choice voters and everybody else overwhelmingly. And in fact, among swing voters, when you ask people what's more of a reason to support the Democrats, the SCOTUS overturning Roe, for example, and eliminating the national right to an abortion, among swing voters in key swing states, they said that was more of a reason to vote for the Democrats by a 48-point margin. So choice was absolutely real. MAGA candidates also paid a real price. So we know that about a third of Republicans nationally don't identify as MAGA Republicans, and the 2/3 say, yes, I am one. Okay, so among voters who identified as a MAGA Republican, nationally, Democrats won 2% of those voters. Among the Republicans who don't identify as MAGA, Democrats won 10%. So that's nice. It's a nice difference. It's real. But when you look at some of the key races, it's really real. Take, for example, Josh Shapiro's race in Pennsylvania. He won 5% of MAGA Republicans. I actually can't even believe he won 5, but he won 5% of MAGA Republicans. He won 38% of non-MAGA Republican voters, whereas
Wow.
John Fetterman only won 11%. And that's important. The 11% is important, but that 38 is remarkable.
Matt and I and a Republican colleague who we have on another show talked endlessly about whether Dobbs was going to be important, overturning Roe v. Wade. And our Republican friend kept saying, no, you people, you're all wrong. It's all about the economy. It's always about the economy, stupid. And the inflation is terrible. And Democrats are going down. And in light of that, Democrats put all their chips on the table on Dobbs. The Democrats make the right move about going with choice.
There's no question that Democrats made the right decision. And we were all nervous about it because we were worried that at some point the voters would tire of hearing about it. And I do want to be clear. I'm not sure that if the Republicans didn't have the Dr. Oz's and the Blake Masters and the sort of hideous and Herschel Walker, the hideously extreme and out of touch candidates that they had. But they have a primary system that naturally gravitates towards getting the most insane person elected. And the litmus test on choice is particularly extreme. So when you look at spending in congressional races, $175 million of Democratic ads were spent talking about abortion. You know how many the Republicans did? $6 million spent on the issue of abortion. That's it, 174 to 6. But Democrats also spent $60 million talking about taxes, $60 million on crime, $21 million on inflation. The level of extremism was just qualitatively different and allowed us to point these guys, largely men, as out of touch with reality and out of touch with the vote.
Pundits are very fond of saying, well, what happens in Washington doesn't matter. It all goes over voters' heads. They don't understand the details. But you made, I thought, a compelling case that at the very least, we took potential targets off the table and that there may have just been an overall vibe, a contrast of Democrats are getting some stuff done.
Yeah.
And we're not setting ourselves up for a 2010-like experience with the ACA. So could you just talk us through a little bit?
What I believe in terms of what the Democrats did, when you look at all the various things that were accomplished, and it is incredible, those are 5 majorly significant pieces of legislation. All 5 of those pieces of legislation are favored by the voters on election day, or were favored on election day, essentially 2/3 to 1/3 tops. And in fact, most of it is 75-25, right? So these are overwhelmingly positive. Whereas in 2010, as you just said to Paul, the ACA was negative 38 to 45. The stimulus plan of Obama's was negative 38 to 49. So in 2010, the Republicans had accomplishments of the Democrats to run against, whereas they didn't have anything to run against on that. So they tried to talk about inflation, and they did. So why didn't that work? Well, part of it is also because the swing voters didn't actually believe that Republican candidates had any good idea to deal with inflation. We heard this in focus groups all over the country. I actually was amazed. Sometimes you sit in focus groups and swing voters who are disengaged with politics, so they don't pay as much attention. So you ask them sort of who's to blame with him for inflation, and they'll kind of default to Joe Biden or default to whoever's in charge. Not this time. When you would actually say who's to blame for inflation, they're like, it's COVID, it's a supply chain, it's like there's something global going on. These swing voters had a deeper understanding of like what was going on and weren't knee-jerk just blaming Joe Biden. And they didn't think the Republicans had any plan to fix it either. So they talked about 87 million jackbooted IRS thugs coming to get you. And I just don't think anyone gave a rat's ass about that. There's just no proof that they did. I don't want to ignore. If we didn't have crazy Republican extreme candidates, I don't know that the same story happens. Like what we see from the voters, Republican turnout was high, Democratic turnout was high, Republican turnout was higher. We won more of these independent voters. Why? Because they rejected the candidates on the other side. We won these voters because the Republican candidates were voting for the party and people voting for the Democrats were voting either for our candidate or against the other candidate. Donald Trump lost this election so badly when you think about it, because when you think about all of the candidates that he got engaged with, and here's where candidates and campaigns matter, he lost all over the place. I also don't want to give America a pass. 48% of the voters of Georgia, 48 and a half, I think, voted for a man who I don't know can sign his own name. And that should also bother us. Herschel Walker should not be getting 48+% of the vote in any state.
Well, you know what H.L. Mencken said, a man who would not end up on Mount Goldschmier. Democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard. And if we had elected Herschel Walker, I think that would very much have applied as we watch him
for sure
attempt to ward off vampire attacks in the Senate. When you're talking about this 2-year-long effort that you've had with our friends at the Center for American Progress to sort of delineate and define and stick Republicans justifiably with this MAGA Republican differentiator, this label, it really reminds me of something that you helped us run on in a campaign in 2012, back when MAGA was Tea Party. I'm old enough to remember when now MAGA is the new Tea Party. And we ran campaigns we were able to paint even relatively moderate Republicans with the brush of, look, they're in league with these Tea Party Republicans. I want to ask you about the President Biden of all of this, because we have seen over and over again, pundits, they've said, all right, look, President Biden, he's lost a step. His political instincts are out of time. He doesn't get it. Time and again, it just seems like he has a pretty good gut feel for things. He does seem to have made the decision to launch his MAGA semi-fascist attack this fall. Was he right? Do we have evidence that was the right thing to do, even amongst all the pearl clutching from the media?
I have to give him the credit for it, right? The presentation went and sort of, this is from the folks at CAP, that this is something that we think could brand the Republicans. The notion was, look, the Republicans have done such a good job of branding the Democrats as socialists. And in part, that's because we actually have some socialists, which isn't very helpful. But it's also just because they drive a message of fear and do it very, very well. So we had the same conversation where, what do we want to brand the Republicans 2 years from now, 4 years from now? If there is no Donald Trump, what do we want? And that's how the MAGA thing sort of came about. And it was Naveen Nayak's sort of brilliant idea. But I have to give the president credit, because the president's the one who was like, yeah, that's right. And we're going to ultra MAGA them. And he got relentlessly attacked. And we were attacked by any number of folks in the establishment. Like, what's a MAGA? It sounds like something I order at the fast food chain. Like, that doesn't mean anything. But it did. And it meant something larger to the voters than just Donald Trump. It meant a level of extremism that they couldn't tolerate. So I give the president and his team a ton of credit for taking up the mantle. And because without the bully pulpit, I don't think the MAGA brand expands and sticks the way that it did.
This may have the quality of saying, hey, Mr. Fox, how's your hen house doing? But you
want to talk about the polls?
I am talking about where I'm going with this. See, this is why you're the best in the business. I'm going to give you some credit. You guys have talked consistently and opening, and you've led consortia of other pollsters. You've worked very, very hard on this question of what may have caused, at least the public polling that the normie world can see, what may have caused it to be off in 2016 and 2020. And I want to be clear to differentiate here, and you'd probably be better at this, between error, just being off, that happens in polling, and bias, which is you're consistently leaning in one direction. And in those two cycles, we saw not just being off, but being off in the direction of Democrats. How did you guys do this last cycle? And how did polling in general do?
That's a great question, Matt. Let's first start with sort of how good was the polling on the private side. In 2016, we know the polls were off. We all thought Hillary Clinton was going to be president. We were wrong. The exit polls were off by 2%. Where the exit polls were really off, particularly before 2016, was how many non-college educated voters, particularly non-college educated white people, were in the electorate. So we were talking to far too many college educated folks and not enough non-college. That didn't matter before 2010, before 2014, because that wasn't a major indicator of how you would vote, non-college, college. But post 2010 and particularly 2014, college education became a critical dividing line, and it has become even more so. So in 2018, all the pollsters talked to many, many more non-college educated white people. And by and large, the polls in 2018 were right. And we figured we got it. It's all good. 2020 comes along, and the exact same thing happens. The polls are off, and as Matt said, they're all off in terms of error, and they are all biased towards the Democrats. So following 2020, my firm, along with 5 of the largest Democratic polling firms, did a major project to try to figure out, how do we fix this thing? We did door-to-door polling, literally, the way we did it back in, I wasn't even alive, the way it was done when polling was first invented. We mailed people surveys and sent them $20 in the survey and said, fill it out. We called people up and said, we're calling from the Trump Institute. We want to do whatever we could do to try to get people to talk to us. Now, I'm not going to get into what some of those things are, because that's a little bit of the secret sauce, not only for my firm, but on the Democratic side. But needless to say, what it resulted in is, in 2020, there was error in statewide polls. The statewide polls were off by about 3%. So what does error mean? Just to go to what you said. Error means the difference between the poll and the actual result. So a 3% error, I said you would win by 2, you won by 5, right? That's a 3% error. The bias is, I said the Democrat was going to win by 1, instead the Democrat won by 4. So that's the bias. So in 2020 statewide, the error and bias were both about 3%. And in House races, it was even bigger, 3.5% error and 3.3% of the bias. So everything biased towards the Democrats. This time in 2022, in statewide races and House races, the error was around 2%, which is completely the norm and expected. And the bias in statewide races was less than 1% towards the Democrats. And in House races was literally 0, meaning we had just as many polls that showed a Republican winning as a Democrat winning. So there was no bias. That's what we want. So do we feel good about 2024? Absolutely not. None of us know, because again, we've been to this dance, and particularly when Donald Trump is on the ballot, something seems to happen with stuff. Let me say one other thing, which is about the public polls, because I think this is really important. The public polls were also generally good, with a major exception. And that is Republican aligned firms, some of which I think are complete frauds, publishing polls in order to influence the coverage.
You're talking about like the Trafalgars,
for example. Yes. So when you looked at the nonpartisan polls, meaning media polls or polls, Marist, Quinnipiac, etc., in the major Senate races, for example, the nonpartisan polls were all very good. They had Mark Kelly winning by 3, he won by 5. They had Raphael Warnock winning by 2, he won by 1. They had Fetterman winning by 2, he won by 4.5. They had Adam Laxalt winning by 0.5 point. Cortez Masto won by 1 point. Those are good. Those are very good polls. But when you look at the Republican aligned firms that flooded and again, I'm not talking about professionals like me. I'm talking about people who are clearly meant to flood the zone with crap data. Mehmet Oz was up by 2 points in those polls. Herschel Walker was up by 3. Maggie Hassan Paul knows this. Maggie Hassan in the Republican polls, they had her tied. She won by 9. They had Mark Kelly up by the teeniest amount. Okay, so that's fine. And they had Laxalt up by 5. So these Republican leaning firms, these Republican aligned things, were clearly trying to either raise money, change the narrative, do something. But it is why Real Clear Politics you should ignore, because they include those folks. And 538 does a good job of trying to weight down those folks to make sure that they are not overly seen. But Real Clear Politics was real crappy polling this year.
You kind of sit at the epicenter of these streams of data and information. You're talking to the candidates, you're talking to operatives who are on the ground. Like, you're talking to people like me 10 years ago. As a matter of fact, you were talking to people like me 10 years ago. And
Or
I
me,
remember,
or me.
yes, right.
Oh.
And I remember a certain election where I was a campaign manager and we were down. We were way down. Our best guess was that we were about 6 to 10 points down. That was just our best set of information. And election night rolls around. I start getting calls from you and other consultants like, hey, Matt, I think you guys might have won this thing. And James Delory gets on the phone with me. Matt, I'm pretty sure you guys won this. I'm like, no, it's impossible, because all my priors were, there's just no way. So I want to take you back to the beginning of this conversation. You were saying that none of us really expected this.
Yeah.
What was your truly, like, truth serum to you? What was your expectation of what was really going to happen coming in here? And what was your sort of emotional reaction to it? Like, how have you experienced the last couple of months, and has it changed any of your thinking about what's going on in America?
So it's a great question, Matt, and everybody will tell you that I was a total miserable prick in the weeks leading up to this election, even more so.
But just then,
even
just
more
then.
so than usual, more so than usual.
Okay, fair.
So I was pretty down because I knew how tough, and I live in New York, so I'm a weird political consultant that lives in New York, not in DC, and I'm grateful for it every day. But I knew that New York things were going poorly, and so it was influencing my brain, everything that I was doing. If I could have taken New York out of the picture and looked at all the data and looked at it academically, I might have suggested that the Democrats were going to have a fine night. So I was in a particularly bad headspace. Looking at the data, I should have been like, oh, things are going to be okay. But that's impossible, because again, I also knew that history said, even if we were tied in a race, if it was 48-48, we're going to lose that race, because the vote shifts against the party in power in these midterm elections. So it truly was historic. And when everything started happening, I really couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it for days. It's that historic what happened and how different it was. And we have to appreciate that. And again, we've gone through all the reasons why it was, but it's why, even though on paper, maybe I should have felt better, no rational human being could have felt other than pessimistic going into it.
All right, I'm going to give one final, consider this like a web bonus here.
Sure.
How did you end up in 2 movies, man?
By complete circumstance is the answer. A mutual friend his brother was producing a movie in New York and said the director wants an actual political consultant to come in and give some advice to make sure that the scenes, the director's a guy named Derek Cianfrance, and he's a accuracy freak. And so I went to Schenectady, where the movie was being filmed, The Place Beyond the Pines. Please go watch it. I make like 0.01 cents every time you watch it, so please do. And I got there, and they were filming a scene where Bradley Cooper was running for attorney general, and I get there, and they've got all these flags set up on the stage with like 20 American flags and 20 New York State flags, and I was like, no, it does not work like that. And I was like, oh, and the American flag has to be taller than the New York flag. And the director's like, what? He was like, I can't believe it. And of course, this is stuff that from advanced work, and Paul knows from being a member and sort of the stuff that we do. And it was great. And he was like, this is what we want. And so I got to film in the movie. He had me film some scenes, all ad lib. So I'm talking about running statewide in New York, all things that I'm used to talking about, having done campaigns here for years. And then I was in a second movie where I'm a pundit on my friends from New York One, where they were using the studio. They needed somebody and they called me up. So watch Nonstop by Liam Neeson, or Place Beyond the Pines with Bradley Cooper, Menendez, and Ryan Gosling. That's how I got my SAG card that I am very, very proud of.
Man, you're famous. You're famous.
Not at all.
Well, in the circles that we run in, like the nerd famous circles, you are extremely famous, and it's well deserved. You are on Mount Goldschmier. You're on the Mount Rushmore of American political consultants, worldwide political consultants. Jeffrey Pollock, it has absolutely been worth the wait. Thanks so much for being on Beyond Politics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Bob.